Welcome to the debate. Today, we are analyzing a particularly severe conflict rooted in the digital realm. It's about the public humiliation initiated by Cybergirl 10, CG10, specifically targeting her fiance Alberto, through a public recorded X space. The source material detailing this incident, well, it raises some really serious questions about intent, context, and harm.
It really does. And this case, I think, is a crucial study in how these high-conflict, intimate relationships intersect with public digital platforms. It often seems to amplify distress exponentially. The material highlights CG10's markedly different behaviors towards three figures: her lawyer, her ex-spouse, and Alberto. So we really have to ask why the confrontation with her partner was the one that became uniquely and frankly profoundly damaging.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our central analytical question, which is really one of prioritization. When we're assessing Alberto's devastating public digital shaming, should we prioritize the deliberate, calculated nature of the weaponization of vulnerability against an intimate partner, or should we view the core explanation through the psychological lens of displaced aggression, an aggression stemming primarily from the perpetrator's, inaccessible external conflicts? I'm going to argue that the primary harm lies in that targeted breach of relational duty and the strategic deployment of known vulnerabilities.
And I'll be arguing that the driving explanation lies in the psychological mechanism known as structurally necessary displaced aggression. This is the overwhelming pressure that forces rage, essentially, to find an available target when those primary conflicts are blocked. And this framework, I believe, aligns perfectly with the material's analysis of the digital scapegoat.
Okay, so let's start with my position. The humiliation of Alberto, as I see it, was a targeted act of psychological warfare. It constituted a catastrophic breach of trust. When we examine this position, we have to start with the context. The venue, as mentioned, was a public recorded X space. Now, this space was previously known as a kind of high-trust digital campfire, built on radical inclusion and non-judgment, the principle of no opino, no juzgo, escucho a todos. By using this community forum, a place meant for safety and vulnerability, as a stage for a private, explosive grievance, CG10 executed what feels like a deliberate ambush. And the first layer of egregious harm, I think, was the public exposure of deeply private family matters, specifically the custody schedule involving an 11-year-old child. The quote, "Do you think that it's okay that you tell me that I have 5 minutes time to talk to my 11-year-old girl when they come home after 2 weeks?" That's highly targeted. This crossed a massive ethical boundary and inflicted with the material itself terms irreparable and permanent harm to the privacy of a non-consenting minor. And critically, CG10 acted with explicit awareness of Alberto's fragile state. She knew he was, quote, emotionally being really struggling badly and dealing with severe mental health issues. That context for me shifts the act from relationship conflict to a targeted psychological assault.
Okay, I come at it from a different way, obviously. While the results were, yes, devastatingly public, the incident itself strikes me as a textbook case study in displaced aggression, or DA. This is driven by an extreme and chronic stress load that originates outside the relationship. The material explicitly details that CG10 was dealing with two severe, very high-stakes external conflicts at the same time: a legal dispute with Mr. Cringedez, a lawyer who had basically gone silent for 4 months, causing immense anxiety, and also ongoing manipulation from an abusive, pathologically intractable ex-spouse, known as Princess.
And the sources do confirm this cumulative stress load was high, unremitting even.
Precisely. So this structural powerlessness against both the rigid legal system and an abusive third party created a profound buildup of frustration, anxiety, and rage that she simply could not address directly. DA theory posits that this intense built-up frustration must be redirected onto a more accessible and proximal target, one that is functionally safer, in a way. Alberto, as the intimate partner, became the designated digital scapegoat. The severity of the attack which was, let's face it, dramatically disproportionate to the stated trigger, his relational withdrawal or ghosting, is actually perfectly proportional to the accumulated external stress load that she felt structurally unable to resolve. The psychological analysis in the material really emphasizes that this kind of public humiliation is often a compensatory mechanism, a way to regain the sense of control lost in those primary external battles.
I understand the structural pressures you're describing, I do. But I want to circle back to the mechanics here, particularly the deliberate choice of venue. You frame the public ambush as desperation, citing CG10's claim that it was the only way that I could reach him after his withdrawal. This suggests, trauma-induced panic.
Well, that framing aligns with classic high-anxiety relational dynamics, doesn't it? A sort of pursuer-demander response to an avoidant partner. She felt unheard, blocked, and her need for immediate engagement, which was likely driven by the external crises, pushed her toward the fastest, most accessible avenue for confrontation she could find.
See, I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the choice of venue demonstrates a functional strategic ability, regardless of the emotional desperation behind it. This wasn't like a desperate text message or private phone call gone wrong. It was a calculated move into a public recorded X space. The analysis identifies this as a tactical power play designed to strip the target of privacy and control. Now, this move achieves two strategic outcomes. First, it leverages the audience for maximal social pressure. And second, it creates a permanent, searchable digital artifact. That ability to select the mechanism that would inflict maximal long-term digital harm suggests calculation to me, a functional intelligence driving the tactical approach, even if the rage itself was displaced.
Okay, but this is where the digital scapegoat framework really helps us separate motivation from method. The technology amplified the harm? Yes, absolutely. It made the artifact permanent. But the motivation, I'd argue, is still rooted in compensation for powerlessness. When confrontation with the primary aggressors, the lawyer who won't respond, the pathologically abusive ex, is impossible, the individual uses whatever accessible means they have. And in this case, it was a ready-made public digital platform to discharge that rage. The public forum, being readily available and frankly requiring little effort to deploy, becomes the path of least resistance for what we might call cyber-displaced aggression. So the mechanism is digital, sure, but the driver remains that chronic need to alleviate internal pressure.
That's an interesting point about the pathway of least resistance. Though I would frame it differently regarding capability. The fact that CG1 contained her rage and frustrations against the lawyer and the ex-husband within, professional, private, and transactional channels, that demonstrates she was, in fact, capable of respecting boundaries when the stakes were legally or strategically high. She sent a measured, formal complaint to the lawyer about competence and lack of communication. Her exchanges with the ex-husband, difficult as they were handled through official channels.
Right, and those channels failed her. The containment was required, not necessarily desired. She contained the rage where containment was necessary to protect her legal standing, perhaps. But those interactions were deeply unsatisfying and clearly did not resolve the core anxiety or the underlying issues.
Exactly my point. The attack on Alberto, therefore, was a selective decision. She consciously chose to deploy maximum force against the one relationship where she felt she could, maybe, enforce compliance and alleviate those crushing feelings of powerlessness. She didn't attack the lawyer in a public space. She attacked her intimate partner in his own space. The material specifically notes that because Alberto was publicly humiliated within his own high-status domain, remember he was a community leader in that digital campfire, the assault caused unique and specific damage. A severe psychic wound linked to hopelessness and helplessness, stemming from this sudden, very public loss of social status and control.
But that selectivity confirms the DA model, just not the primacy of calculation in the way you mean it. The primary provocateurs, the lawyer, the ex-spouse, were structurally inaccessible. They were protected by complex legal and professional boundaries, making direct, satisfying confrontation functionally impossible without risking worse outcomes for her. The fury transferred to Alberto precisely because he was the accessible, the proximate, and ultimately the safer target for the accumulated rage. This dynamic is structurally necessitated because all other routes felt blocked. The analysis seems clear. This is relational scapegoating, where he was unfairly assigned blame for her external failures and frustrations because she couldn't reach the true source of her distress.
Okay, this is where we must make a critical distinction, I think, between generalized dysfunction and genuine psychological assault. I see why you think this is pure relational scapegoating, projecting internal shame onto an accessible victim to relieve psychic pressure. However, the attack transcends that psychological mechanism because of its content. This isn't just rage transferred, it's a profound violation of relational duty and care.
So what makes it more than displacement, in your view? What's the distinguishing factor?
It's the specific selection of information used in the attack. Knowing Alberto was dealing with severe mental health issues, a fact CG10 was explicitly aware of, and still choosing to use the most sensitive familial secrets, specifically his parental role and his child's privacy, that is the calculated weaponization of a partner's vulnerability. She chose the most sensitive pressure point available, the nuclear option, really. This moves the act beyond simple transferred anger and dysfunction and firmly into the territory of targeted psychological assault. The intent seems to shift from merely displacing rage to inflicting maximal emotional pain through precision targeting.
But the material does suggest that stress from things like narcissistic abuse and legal powerlessness fundamentally leads to emotional dysregulation so severe that the anger must be externalized just to cope. If we focus too heavily on the content of the violation, aren't we risking ignoring the chronic psychological need that drives the violence itself? The choice of sensitive information might be opportunistic, sure, but the driver is still that compensatory mechanism. The only way to truly mitigate this kind of rage transfer, arguably, is to reduce the chronic external stress load feeding it.
I appreciate that focus on the root cause, I really do. But Alberto's response, which is highlighted in the material, it underlines the severity of this targeting from his perspective. He questioned, "I wonder, what have I done to be the one you treated the worst among the three people? Lawyer, ex-husband, and me. Do I deserve that?" This demonstrates that he recognized the uniquely calculated nature of the attack against him specifically. The harm here isn't just an echo of her stress, it feels like a strategic blow against his core identity and his known fragility, constituting a severe breach of the duty of care owed to a partner struggling with known severe mental health issues.
And while the consequences are undoubtedly abusive and targeted, I'd still argue the psychological analysis emphasizes that this behavior is often used to overcome perceived helplessness in other life domains. The public shaming is a tactic that aligns with abusive dynamics? Yes, absolutely. But its origin seems to be the blocked goals and the overwhelming need for efficacy, which is the core of the displaced aggression model and the digital scapegoat concept. Understanding this displacement is essential, I think, for understanding why she risked the intimate relationship, which she ultimately destroyed, rather than continuing to face those high-power, inaccessible targets directly.
Well, our discussion has certainly underscored that while CG10 was clearly under severe external duress, which helps explain the sheer force of her outburst, the specific method, content, and context of the attack on Alberto, the public shaming, violating the community's high-trust contract, and critically exposing a minor's privacy, these represent a severe, targeted breach of ethical and relational duty. This strategy inflicted permanent digital trauma, and the conscious choice of these tactics over, say, private redress suggest a calculated element in the execution of the assault.
And conversely, we must conclude that the driving force behind the disproportionate nature of the attack is likely the chronic psychological need to redirect rage caused by that structural powerlessness against formidable external adversaries. The incident is a tragic and, frankly, brutal demonstration of the digital scapegoat dynamic, how compounding chronic life stress can necessitate the creation of a digital scapegoat within an intimate relationship. It's a process psychologically rooted in overcoming acute feelings of powerlessness.
Ultimately, to fully appreciate the material's complexity, it seems we really have to consider both forces at play. We can't ignore the powerful psychological root cause, that structurally necessary displacement of reach. Yet, we also have to acknowledge the devastating and arguably calculated effect of the chosen tactics, which transformed that displacement into a targeted, public weaponization of vulnerability against a fragile partner.
It's been a rigorous exchange, and I think it demonstrates how the study of human conflict really requires us to look simultaneously at the internal pathology, perhaps, of the aggressor and the ethical calculus embedded in their choice of mechanism and target. There's clearly more to explore here.